Hi, everyone. We're going to start here. This is the session on City as a Commons, where we're also going to look at LabGov Amsterdam, the laboratory of the governance of the Commons Amsterdam, this possibility of this idea. So, my name is Sophie Bloemen. I work with Commons Network, which is a civil society organization based in Berlin and Brussels, working on bridging commons thinking and commons initiatives to policy and politics. And today we have 6 male speakers here in this panel. So I apologize for this problematic setting. Let me introduce them. We have Stan Major, who's professor of coordination of urban issues. He's at the Amsterdam University of Applied Sciences. And he has been involved with the municipality and has a strong interest in the exchange between academy and practice. We have Christian Iaione, who's professor in law in Italy, Rome. And he is director of the Laboratory for the Governance of the Commons in Bologna and has developed a regulation there. We have Thomas de Groot, who is member of the Pirate Party in Amsterdam and part of the governing council, I translated, in Amsterdam West. Yeah. We have Joachim Meerkerk, who is from Pakhuis de Zwijger, who is there responsible for programming on democracy and many other important themes. And we have John Grin, who is full professor of policy science, especially system innovation at the Department of Political Science at the University of Amsterdam. And we have Michiel Zwarts, who is a social entrepreneur, working and social innovator and thinker and speaker, working on many issues and has coined the concept of sustainism, which I'm sure he will touch upon today. So, firstly, I'd like to have John Grin and Christian up here, and they are our chairs. So while they take a seat, I'll introduce the session. So we talk about the city as a commons. Today in Amsterdam, but in many cities across the world and in Europe, there's many urgent challenges. There is lack of affordable housing. There is a problem with ecological sustainability and congestion. There's a lack of equality. There's gentrification. People are forced to move out of their city. There's a loss of community. And some of the issues we also touched upon earlier in the session about collaborative economies, the role Airbnb plays in this, and the Ubers. So you can say there's a lot of challenges in the urban environment, and at the same time, there's a lot of interesting, inspiring initiatives. Citizens taking direct responsibility for their environment, community initiatives that engage with their neighbors or with a garden or with providing health care. So some people would call these initiatives commoning. These are acts of commoning that we can see throughout the city. Some would call them city making. Some would call them do-it-yourself initiatives. And there's quite a lot happening here in Amsterdam as well. So how does these two developments, or on the one hand this urgency about the right, who owns the city, or for who is the city, or are we living sustainably in the city? Apparently we're not. And questions around equality and justice, and this other development on these cool or hopeful initiatives that have ecological sustainability maybe as a core design principle to their practice. How do these two developments relate? How can they work? How can the one help the other, if at all? So that's a little bit what we'll explore today. First, I'd like to ask to Christian and John, what is this concept of the city as a commons? What does it mean? Why is it important?
Thank you. Can you hear me?
You have to press the button. Sorry. Here is the...
Okay. Thank you. Okay, when it comes to the definition question, I always panic because there are so many definitions, and and these definitions are also kind of in development, and this is something that we started many years ago. Myself, I started studying the commons, especially the commons in the city, more than 10 years ago. I was ending my PhD thesis, and I realized that the whole theoretical framework I was working within was completely flawed. And I concluded a study on locally owned companies by local governments with a new research question about the commons. What if everything that I wrote in the last, it was like 300 pages book, was completely wrong because it was framed within a neoliberal framework? And what if we started reconceiving publicly owned companies at the local level as a non-profit commons-based utilities? Why I say is that because then right after I realized, well, if I start this new research project by saying that I want to communify basically public utilities at the local level, I'm going to be not able to even capture the attention for 1 second. It was 10 years ago, and Europe was privatizing almost everything. I would not capture the attention of any policymaker if I want to do this on the ground, which this is something that I would like to stress as a research methodology. So I said, maybe we should start from simple things, from what then came to be framed as the urban commons. Small resources, small-scale resources, similar to the one resources that Elinor Ostrom was studying in other kind of settings, like the rural context, but that could be mirroring the kind of similar dynamics, smallish scale, cohesive environment, and kind of homogeneous communities. And that's where I started from the idea that you build the idea of the city as a commons by sharing shared resources at the very small scale level. And the idea of the city as a commons came after the regulation in Bologna. I was part of this, one of the main drafters of the and coordinating the project. And I want to start from the last article of the regulation, not the definition. To keep it short, the last article, it's not the last really, it's the article 35 of the regulation, is about experimentation. The regulation has a definition around the urban commons, and that's, Mayo gave a wonderful definition. You have to have a collaborative community, and you have to have a shared resource, and then you have to have a sort of governance scheme that is commons-based. But I would add another feature to the definition today, if I had to draft again the definition that is in Article 2 of the regulation, which is room for experimentation. And that's what Article 35 of the regulation says, that the regulation is going to be subject, together with citizens, to an experimentation period. And that's what Co-Bologna, the last 2 years, was about in Bologna. And I think this is the kind of the lesson that the commons, and especially the commons in the city, teach us. The idea that the commons, differently from maybe the market and the state, leave freedom for action, room for action, and room of operation, and room for experimentation, as Yochai Benkler would say.
Okay, great. Thank you. John Grin, please add to that.
Yeah, indeed, I will just add to that because it would be difficult to disagree with the way you defined the concept and also with the way you positioned it in contemporary societies, for societies of the past 25 years or something. So what I will do is add one element to your definition and maybe give a somewhat more long-term perspective of the historical background to get a clue of what we're heading for. What I want to add to the definition, put briefly, is that we're talking also about tremendously changing not only relationships between different actors in society, citizens, governments, firms, but also changing identities, changing understandings of who we are and how we want to relate to each other. And that has a lot to do, if you take this longer-term perspective, with how our societies have developed since, let's say, the early industrial revolution. It was a time that the faith in progress was large. Science and technology would help society to develop. And that has indeed happened, but in a particular way. And one key element for this discussion of that way is that it was a very central way. So electrification, for instance, or gasification have done a lot for economic growth, a lot for social well-being, but they were organized through utilities. Utilities that would centrally produce electricity and then distribute it to economic production here, household consumption there, agricultural production there, and so on. So it was a central system. You can say the same about gas. You can say the same about water, for instance, for water supply. But also, of course, about the welfare state that emerged later after the labor movement had emerged. Also the welfare state was a very central provision to arrange welfare and well-being of the people. Simultaneously, that whole process indeed was successful, at least in the sense that it did breed novel generations of much better educated people, people who also were in better shape, in better circumstances. And these people increasingly started to contest that others were deciding about main things for them. So these were the democratization movements of the 1960s, and then we can call that. And now we even are in a time, I would say, that autarky is even becoming a word again. People are pledging for autarky in our societies. They want to live their own lives. And that's maybe the strongest expression, but autonomy certainly is a key value of contemporary societies. And that is it tense, of course, in obvious ways, with this notion of centrally organized societies. So that is a major development that has been going on, and that explains a lot about that people are now indeed looking for ways to decentrally organize the economy as well as the personal lives. Finally, there's one other thing here. There's also been quite some problems with this economy. Problems that, if you approach them abstractly, have to do with the fact that economic production and also consumption practices have become detached, for instance, from electricity supply. So we even don't notice that we're using energy. It has become very much self-evident. But the use of energy has become a major problem for the planet. So we are now looking for ways to break through that, to recouple what has been decoupled previously, and that too points to much more connection between all these different things that we used to have. You could say the same about welfare state reforms now ongoing, apart from the austerity argument, which is an important one, this neoliberalism that you mentioned, but apart from that, there is also this notion that people want to be active in society. Many of them don't want to be deactivated by the welfare state, they want to be active. So there is these side effects of early development too are expressing themselves. So there's this longing for autonomy, the emergence of network society through ICT, and the side effects of early developments that all create a move towards the commons.
Okay. Thank you. So, okay, thank you for this descriptive, and it talks about a form of organizing and the way a citizen acts and is. What about this moral claim of the city as a commons that some would automatically understand it as? Like, is the city as a commons, our right to the city. How does that fit within this framework?
So building on the previous remarks, so of course to experiment what? Because that's the point. You can have a normative, and we should have a normative vision of the city as a commons, always willing to challenge it and to perfectionate it, because we need to leave room for uncertainty and imperfection. But the normative claim has to be a political claim to the city as a commons. It cannot, I would say political rather than moral. The idea that the city is owned by city inhabitants, not even citizens, is owned through its resources and through its governance structure. So to go from it's not even enough, I started to say, to just run the gardens, the vacant lots, or the abandoned buildings. You need to gradually, and that's, I think, the approach that we need, to gradually scale up from single resources, the urban commons, to the city as a commons, to changing basically the basic functioning of democracy at the urban level. You know, I'm thinking to devices like the Assembly of the Commons that Michel has, always fostered and, talked about, to other regulatory schemes that have to do with power distribution, to power production, to energy production, to Wi-Fi, open wireless networks like Wi-Fi in Barcelona. Okay. So to these sort of things, to make the final claim that is, changing even changing the urban constitution. Cioè creating a new social contract at the urban level in which the commons, the community, are really in the driver's seat, and all the other institutions, especially the city government, is an enabling state, an enabling institution that enables what? Collective action for the commons.
Wonderful, that's clear. So there's also a clear political dimension here. I'd like to finalize this block, this question, and move to the next question. So thank you, and maybe you'll be up here again later. I'd like to ask Joachim and Stan up here, we'll address the question: what is the situation in Amsterdam? What's happening with city making? What are all these cool initiatives? And Joachim, maybe you can speak first. So this is a bit of an improvisation with this format, so bear with us, but we didn't want to do the row, so yeah, please. So what's happening in Amsterdam? What are all these cool city-making initiatives? So Joachim is at Pakhuis de Zwijger. He's doing many things, but he's also kind of coordinating or bringing together a big network of city makers within and outside of Amsterdam throughout Europe. And Amsterdam is taking a leading role in some of these initiatives, I understand. So
yes, that's correct. With Pakhuis de Zwijger, we've been sort of investing on building a platform for what we call city makers here in Amsterdam. We have been doing that for more than 5 years now. Simply said, what we do is on a daily basis we organize 2 or 3 events, bringing together people that are working on new ways to make the city. We want to do that cross-disciplinary, but also through all the different layers and aspects of society. So we bring together civil servants, social innovators, politicians, people working in the civil society organization, etc. But to answer your question, I don't think I should sort of describe a specific project or specific initiatives, and I can name millions of them, but the most important thing that is happening now, and I will use an example of 2012, when we just started doing what we're doing at the moment with Pakhuis de Zwijger. We created an event, and we called it Amsterdam Transition Town. And we wanted to have a sort of a big festival, and we need about 400, 600 people in our building to give it a sort of a good atmosphere. So we had a kind of a practical problem. How do we get 400 to 600 people? So we thought, okay, maybe we organize all kinds of different sessions. So we do a session on cooperative area development. We do a session on community currencies. We do a session on city farming or urban farming. We do one on, well, all kinds of different domains. And we thought, like, okay, then we have everybody in the building, and there's a lot of people, and, well, it looks like there's something going on. And actually, that worked, not particularly in the way we thought about it, but actually a lot better. Because what happened is that these people, they came together and they came to visit, a session in their own interest. But in the end, they were all visiting sessions of other type of practices. So people that were interested in urban farming, they went to visit the sessions on community currencies, and they sort of thought, like, oh, this is funny. it's something completely different, but actually it's totally the same, or it uses the same kind of principles. And then we organized all these sessions in the different halls in the venue. But actually the best energy was found in the stairways, because people were grouping up over there, and they sort of recognized each other, and they were talking about, okay, what is this? This is some kind of a new movement, and I think that is an important thing that is happening here in Amsterdam, but it's happening, I think, all over Europe and maybe even all over the world. That there's this people with a specific type of energy organizing things in their own neighborhoods themselves, and they're doing that on a very small basis, but together they form a sort of a social movement, and that comes at the same time, and that's not a coincidence, at a point where, as John just described, the existing system of organizing the public domain, organizing the city, is failing in all kinds of ways. And so I think that this movement, people are organizing little things, but becoming together, they're becoming a movement, can actually be a way towards a new kind of system, as Christian explained, when you create layers, layers and layers, and it could be an alternative way to think about organizing democracy in society.
Wow, okay, thank you. That's, Stan, please give your perspective.
Well, my own specialty is urban planning and urban development. And if I look at that topic in Amsterdam, because your question was about Amsterdam, I'm not optimistic about this commons ID. Amsterdam went through a quite severe bust in the aftermath of the global economic crisis. That coincided, I think, with the boom of Pakhuis de Zwijger. And a lot of discussions there about different ideas about urban development in the city. And you saw a lot of initiatives in the city. Amsterdam, as people might know or might not know, has a strong tradition of centralized, professionally led urban development. This came to almost a complete standstill in the global economic crisis. And at the same time, you saw this blossoming of all kinds of more common-like initiatives for urban development, sometimes in empty office buildings, sometimes in small plots of lands here and there. And there was really a strong optimism at that time that this could develop into a new mode of urban development, which was much more people-centered, which was more creative, which was less dependent on big streams of money and government institutions. Well, since a couple of years, I think the crisis is over, and the new regime is coming back, and it's coming back hard. The old regime, sorry, yeah. So the new idea of more common-like urban development gets in a very difficult position. The city is taking over. They made a huge plan for 25,000 new houses. It will be implemented top-down. The commoners are left to the leftover spots in the fringes.
So it's not that you, to understand correctly, you agree with what Joachim shared, and it's not that you disagree with maybe the potential or the beauty or the social justice aspects or the need for these commoning initiatives. It's more that you think there's no future for them because the old regime is coming down on us hard.
Well, yes, so I think I'm in a safe place here. I completely support the philosophy of the commons. I also think that this whole urban planning system of the Netherlands has a lot of disadvantages. I only try to sketch the reality at this moment, the way I see it. And I think this whole idea of the commoners has to sort of interact with this reality and then look at ways to criticize it and to come up with alternatives. Yeah. And I think in my particular domain of urban development, you see different pressures at the same time. Yeah. On the one hand, there's this strong pressure of do-it-yourself, of people-centered initiatives. It's mostly middle class, by the way. But on the other hand, you see a huge urgency to solve a housing crisis. And the traditional problem is, let's do it top down, because it's the quickest and the most efficient.
Traditional solution, yeah.
Yeah.
Do you share this perspective, Joachim?
Yes, I recognize the threat of, especially here in Amsterdam, because in other cities in the Netherlands, for example, it's a different thing. Because here in Amsterdam, there's a lot of capital that is waiting to be invested here in the city. So I recognize the threat, but I think as well that in the last couple of years, we also built something. We build a network, we build a community, not just the commoners in the city creating all kinds of beautiful projects, but also in the departments here at the municipality, in other areas like the civil society organizations or the housing corporations. We build something. And I think we should use that infrastructure, use that network to keep on experimenting. As I totally agree with Christian, because I don't think it's a matter of just implementing a new system that somebody thought up or maybe a group of people thought up, but I think we need a lot of experimentation to actually find out what works and what doesn't work. But also we need the experimentation to expand the network and expand the community of people that want to work with it. But I recognize the threat, but I think it's very important as well that we put that out in the open. We had Saskia Sasse at Pakhuizen last Monday, and she was in a conversation with Christian. And the image that she draws on the speculative capital that is taking over the city center here in Amsterdam, in London, all over the world. I mean, it's just terrifying image of vacant cities that, while on the outskirts of the city, people are getting more and more or suffering more and more of poverty, have no affordable housing. I mean, have a very urgent situation. So,
well, that's a very good bridge actually to our next question. So you want to have a response as well. I also want to say that if you have a question, if you want to add, if you want to intervene, please raise your hand, and we'll accommodate that need.
Yeah, in addition to Joachim, I also really support this idea of that we have to find the niches, and we have to look at the potential of this commons very clearly, and also research institutions can help in this way. So I also feel responsible for that. I mean. But on the other hand, we also have to be realistic, I think. In your introduction, you started up with summarizing all these huge urban problems that are around. This idea of commoners is very much based on the idea that you can find local solutions for that. Well, we live in an interconnected world where you can do a lot of stuff on local level, and there's a lot of interest in doing that. But there's hardly any problem I can think of that you can solve just on a local level. So we have to see the interrelatedness of urban issues like inequality or discrimination or housing prices. You cannot solve that only with the Commoners project. So that's my first point. And I think we have to look at the structural aspects that also run the city, so to say. Yesterday in Pakhuizen we also talked about this land ownership, for example, issue, which is hot in Amsterdam. We had common land ownership, and the current political regime that's sitting behind us has decided to abolish it. So these are more structural issues that you have to take into account if you discuss the potential and the limits of commoners in Amsterdam.
Right. Okay. Thank you very much.
Never talk about land ownership.
Lots of questions. Okay.
Can I make just one remark? Because I totally agree, but there's one thing that I want to add, and that is, I agree. We can't solve everything on a local level. and we need a more bigger, maybe even a global level. But that is something else than we need the actual existing global system that is in place now. I mean, we shouldn't forget that we can also, and that is, I think, what Christian is pointing out, we can work towards the change of that system. And I think that looking at the current global system, the financial system, all that kind of things, political system, those are failing, and those are actually creating a lot of the problems that we are in. So I think, yes, we need a higher level than the local level, but we shouldn't misconceive that as the same thing as that we need the current global system.
Right. We need to work on many levels, I would say, yeah, at the same time. So there's a few questions. I would say while the questions are posed, maybe we can change. Yeah, okay, yeah, that's a good idea. No, he has a mic, okay. Actually. That's the beauty of these places then. And I ask Thomas de Groot and Jean-Gin back on the podium. So, and then we're all able to answer questions because we all have mics. So please go ahead.
Sense. Oh, all right. Sorry, just push once. I got the sense that it looks like people talk as if commoners are left with a small margin in this world, and the rest of the world is owned either by government or those who own the government. So why is that? We live on this world, it's our world. We can talk about the entire area of this world as our own. So why do we talk about this world as if we are in the margin? That's my question.
Any of the speakers who just want to speak to that? Phil? Can you speak to that?
Not from... no, because I... Also in this... I mean, the last conversation, I feel a bit sort of uneasy. It's a different way of... You phrase it differently, that we're sort of pushed in that corner and it's, you know, commons and urban development going this way and, you know, yes, commoning could play maybe a role, but, you know, the powers that be are somewhere else. I think we have to... I'm sort of critical of that, but we also have to, maybe that's a more optimistic view, I think we have to ride the wave. And when I say ride the wave, I see that as a sort of social, cultural, and partly beginning political wave, that there's the more players in the field. We had, if you look at institutions and institutional design shaping the city, there's two players been there 2 centuries, the public and the private, the state and the market. The whole idea, if you read Ostrom, if you read everything about the commons, is that we have to now think in terms of a triangle. That is the playing field. So it's not the public-private partnership that has ruled now 30, 40 years as the mainstream of this so-called urban development, where you get a triangle and you get commons and commoners, and we're still searching. I mean, I think this is the challenge for the LabGov, and to what is the institutional form of this commoning? We haven't. We're in the middle of that. We cannot wait until we get the definitions right. We already have to be in the practice. So we really have to think in terms of that triangle. Where do we go from here? We have to change the practices. We have to change the discourse as well. It's not about urban development. It's no coincidence that the discussion more and more in all places in Europe anyway, I can't see, and also I think in the US, beyond I can't see. It's from urban planning to city making. It's from space to place making. Place making, city making is something different from urban development. And it's not because we have a great theory of place making and city making, but we have an enormous body of practice already of city making. So I think that's where we have to look. And then I'm a firm believer that we're in an age that practice is way ahead of theory now. So let's not see, oh, what new theories we can have or old ones on commons to build practice on, then we have to go the other way around. We have to
Okay,
tease
clear.
out the thousands of practices, what the concepts are, that we can move further in the era of this triangle. And
Okay.
I don't know the answers, but it's a major shift, and don't throw it away. This is a paradigm shift.
Don't throw it away, people. Yeah.
I agree, it's a bit pessimistic. But there are two different sides of this story, I think. Because what Michiel just talked about is the perspective of what are we going to do? And I totally agree. And I mean, it gives me a lot of energy, and I want to work at it every day. But there's also the analysis of the current situation that we're in that creates the urgency to do that. And I think that we are living in a society where there are, at this moment, huge democratic deficits to be solved. So maybe it's a bit of a pessimistic story, but that is because in the analysis, in the background, there is this pessimistic view, or a negative view from my side at least. But then I team up with Michiel, and